Okay, now let's fix this. My name is Felix and I'm your host for today's episode of What About It? Starbase comes back to life, SpaceX acquires a new launch site, Falcon 9 launches, and Falcon Heavy has no legs. Hakuto-R slams into the moon's surface. Stay tuned and let's dive right in. Starship updates. It's been only a week since the most powerful rocket ever to exist successfully lifted off and performed better than anyone could have ever imagined. Unfortunately, the same can't be said about the concrete under the orbital launch mount, but it looks like SpaceX has a trick up its sleeves to prevent this from happening again in the future. More on that later. In the previous episode, we quickly went over the damage done to the launch site after it was showered with thousands of concrete projectiles that shot up in the air after the Starship's liftoff. Now that everyone was finally able to calm down after this hell of a ride, it's starting to look like the damage was not so bad after all. SpaceX's workers wasted little to no time and are already in the tedious process of cleaning up everything that can be even remotely considered as a hazard to the public. The cleanup process should also help with the investigation started by the FAA hours after the explosion. Many headlines were saying that the Federal Aviation Administration grounded Starship indefinitely. And while technically that is true, a mishap investigation is a completely normal procedure that happens after any anomaly, regardless of which company pressed the launch button. SpaceX was investigated after every prototype launch that ended with an explosion, so for them it's nothing new. It's just a matter of a few weeks, in the worst case months, until the cause of the malfunction will be discovered and the investigation will be concluded. An assessment released by US Fish and Wildlife Services showed us that even though there was a small fire that was started after the liftoff and the debris managed to cover the incredible amount of 385 acres, overall, nothing landed on refuge fee-owned lands and no wildlife or birds were harmed during the launch. Of course, that doesn't mean that the FAA can't start a new, refined environmental assessment, but let's have our fingers crossed that this won't happen, as it would severely delay any launches from Starbase. 3 days after the launch, the weather at Boca Chica was pretty rough. Heavy rain, a thunderstorm, and even a tornado warning issued by the National Weather Service. And that definitely didn't help with the cleanup process. On the other hand, when Mauricio from RGB Aerial Photography did his next flyover on April 26th, the weather was spotless, resulting in some outstanding imagery allowing us to take a closer look at the state of the launch complex. In just days, SpaceX workers were able to contain most of the debris around the launch pad. The anti-water hammer tanks near the tower look almost untouched. Poor Hoppy was partially stripped from its shielding but stood strong against the chaos that occurred before Starship cleared the tower. More concerning is the orbital launch tank farm itself. As you can see, 2 of the horizontal tanks were pretty badly dented, but they do not appear to have been ruptured. The storage tanks look a lot worse. SpaceX engineers inspected them really thoroughly, especially the leaky LOX tank, which may mean that they are already working on a solution. Fortunately, what you see here is not the tank itself being dented, but rather its GSE shell taking all the impact. Those large tanks are built with a double wall, a tank inside and an insulating shell on the outside. This could mean that for some tanks, a simple shell swap would be all that's needed to restore them to their original state. The thing that definitely catches the most attention is, of course, the orbital launch mount itself. Once the Raptor flame stripped it down to its protective paint, the rust took over. It's crazy to think that in just a few days the OLM got this rusty. Nothing some polishing and a fresh coat of paint can't solve though. Before we get into a new flame protection system, a brand new and already destroyed heat shield and more, now's the time to hit the like button, subscribe, or even become an active supporter and get behind the scenes access by becoming a patron or a channel member. Thank you so much for your support. Back on the ground, we could spot the first signs that Stage 0 is actually somewhat alive. Even though the Drawworks shielding looks to have more holes than a slice of Swiss cheese. Mechazilla survived. April 24th was the first time when the chopsticks went down since the launch. That doesn't mean that it requires zero repairs, as we've seen some parts being removed, but it gives a really optimistic outlook on the whole mechanism. It remains to be seen how long it will take to fix all the damage done to the orbital launch mount. Workers had to enter the launch table using a man lift, as the previously used stairs are now floating in mid-air. It didn't take long for the second staircase to make its way near the launch tower. I suppose that in the following days it will most likely get attached to the mount itself, so the SpaceX crew will have easier access to the inside of the launch mount. Next, access panels for the booster quick disconnect were removed and the retract mechanism was tested. It looks like the BQD or booster quick disconnect hood did its job unbelievably well, as the quick disconnect plate itself looks almost untouched. Great to see so much stuff still working after what seemed like an outright apocalyptic launch. While we still don't know how structurally sound the foundations are internally, we do know how SpaceX wants to protect them in the future. Talking about awesome stuff, if you don't want to wait long for something awesome to arrive at your doorstep, you can join the monthly membership club of Bespoke Post to deliver your box of awesome with top shelf goods from under the radar brands to your doorstep every month. 90% of the products come from small brands, many of which are based right here in the US. Every box of awesome has around $70 worth of goods inside, but costs you only a fraction of the value. Get introduced to cool new products, outdoor gear, bearwear, home and kitchen goods, clothing and more based on a preference quiz that you fill out. I set up for a nice evening with the family Flicker's personal cement fireplace for a relaxing marshmallow roast time for the kids, and the Dram Kit with jumbo ice ball molds for whiskey on the rocks in your Mixology Charm DOF glasses for me and my wife. 2 quick splashes of this old-fashioned premium cocktail syrup, and read through the field guide to whiskey to lay your own foundation of expert knowledge. You only pay for what you want and even get 20% off your first box of awesome. Click the link in the description and enter whataboutit20 at checkout, or go to bespokepost.com/whataboutit20. You see, the main problem with the first launch was the initial impact of Raptors igniting that cracked the concrete. 33 engines igniting caused a powerful shockwave which traveled downwards to the concrete and cracked it open like an eggshell. After that, the Raptor engine flames were easily able to penetrate the underside of the surface through the cracks and just rip off chunks of concrete. If they could somehow suppress the initial impact and keep the ground cool enough, then maybe a flame trench wouldn't be necessary at all. That's where SpaceX's new and maybe even brilliant idea comes into play. Musk mentioned on his Twitter that for months now they've been working on a special water-cooled steel plate to be placed at the base of the orbital launch mount. We've seen parts scattered around the Sanchez site suggesting that some sort of water deluge was in the process of being made. Now, thanks to the astonishing work of Ryan Hansen Space and Zach from CSI Starbase, we can see exactly how those parts fit together. And they definitely don't look like a normal water deluge. Instead, SpaceX opted for a pretty interesting solution. 6 steel plates placed near the OLM's legs will act as a giant heatsink. Of course, without any form of cooling, they wouldn't be really effective. That's why they have those little channels allowing the water to flow and absorb the heat. But collecting this now superheated water and cooling it back down would be a complicated process. So it seems that instead all the heated water will be poured over the center hexagon. This way they can keep the plates cool and also protect the middle from being torn apart. Will this be enough to keep the Starship from destroying Stage 0 every time it launches? What do you think? Let me know in the comments. My guess would be maybe. A few days ago, Dr. Phil Metzger, a scientist who worked on NASA's Morpheus project, a test bed for autonomous vertical liftoff and landing, shared his experience of using metal plates instead of classical means of flame diverters. Supposedly, they worked surprisingly well when the whole launch pad was covered in steel. To get rid of the heat, they were painted with a special ablative coating, but he says that nothing stops one from using other means of cooling. This method of launch pad shielding doesn't protect the rocket from the launch acoustics, but it turns out that this actually might not be needed. A few days ago, an old NASA research paper from 1971 resurfaced, and it's surprising how much of it still can be applied to Starship. According to this paper, the most amount of noise level during a launch is angled 45 degrees away from the rocket's plume. This means that if you use a classical flame diverter or flame trench, you're getting rid of the noise bouncing back and hitting the engines, but you also are directing more of the noise to the rocket's body itself. Those noise waves can be incredibly well seen in Everyday Astronauts and Cosmic Perspectives recording of Starship liftoff. Make sure to check out their channels, links are in the description. This means that as long as Starship can handle the vibrations, using no flame diverter might be the best course of action. NASA also concluded that for giant boosters, and it just so happens that Super Heavy is the biggest and baddest of them all, a normal water deluge is impractical, as actually to make a difference it would need to use an insane amount of water, which isn't a viable option at Starbase. So it looks like the simple looking set of steel plates might actually be the one thing that solves the Raptors being stoned to death during the launch problem once and for all. Just remember that those are only tests for now. It may turn out that in the end, SpaceX will have to install some sort of diverter paired with a water deluge system. Before that happens though, there's still the long process of figuring out if and how the OLM's foundations can be saved. Now let's move to the production side, as it's been a while since we've been there. Ship 27, the first prototype capable of placing Starlink V2s into orbit, has been rolled out of the high bay and transported to the rocket garden. Typically, it would mean that the vehicle is weeks away from being scrapped, but not this time. It's either waiting for its turn to get engines, as Ship 26 is right now occupying the Raptor install stand. Or, what's more likely is that it's just a parking spot until the SPMTs will transport it to the Massey's test site for some cryogenic testing. Time will tell. Now here comes a sad one. On April 25th, Ship 28 was lifted using the new lifting jig, eliminating the need for crane hookup points on top of the ship's nose cone. It might have solved one problem, but it did introduce another one, as after the lift, all heat tiles near the lifting points were cracked. It remains to be seen if workers will just replace the tiles when the ship is destined to fly, or if they'll figure out a way not to break the tiles while lifting prototypes. Starship heat tiles are incredibly brittle. Chief was able to spot Ship 29's nose cone fully covered in TPS tiles. For now, it looks pristine, but as we've seen just moments ago, probably not for long. Still, SpaceX has come really far since Ship 24's heat shield. It starts looking like it actually might withstand the incredible temperatures during a Starship's eventual atmospheric re-entry. It's pretty obvious that the Starship rapid unscheduled disassembly didn't dampen the enthusiasm of SpaceX's engineers even a bit. The main goal is to push through with the cleanup process and get ready for the next launch. The production of new prototypes, though, never slows down. Now let's take a look at Hakuto-R, a largely Japanese moonlander which was supposed to land on the moon on April 26th. It was so close to achieving something no private company ever managed to do. Over 4 months ago, an interesting payload was sent in the direction of our closest friend atop a Falcon 9 rocket. That payload was iSpace's lunar lander Hakuto-R M1. A lightweight, privately funded mission supposed to carry UAE's Rashid rover and JAXA's Sora-Q transformable robot to the moon's surface. If they succeeded, they would be the first private company to land a probe on the moon. Previous tries, such as the first private moonlander Bereshit, didn't stick the landing. Unfortunately, that's not what happened. The landing attempt in the Atlas Crater region was carried out on April 26th. Up to this point, everything was going perfectly and according to plan. The lander entered a stable orbit around the moon on March 21st, followed by sending some beautiful pictures of our home planet, Earth. Only one thing separated them from total success, and that was the finishing move, the moon landing itself. On April 26th, Hakuto-R started to descend slowly, hoping for a safe touchdown, but just seconds before the landing, the telemetry went silent, and the communication between mission control and the lander was dropped. At first, no one was too concerned, as problems with the signal shortly after landing were expected. Later, it became clear that the mission unfortunately didn't make it. iSpace engineers determined that the lander indeed was properly aligned for the landing attempt, but the fuel ran out too fast, making it pick up speed before doing a hard landing. This unfortunately means that the payload was also lost. The title of the first private company to land on the moon is still up for grabs. It's a shame that it didn't work out, especially since because of the fueling constraints it took a really long time to reach the moon. According to iSpace, 8 out of 9 mission goals were achieved, so it still provided them with heaps of data to analyze. Hopefully, this experience will help them get ready for another mission, as the launch of the M2 lander is planned for 2024, with a third mission following shortly after in 2025. Going back to Earth with fantastic news, SpaceX leased Space Launch Complex 6 from the Space Launch Delta 30 in California. This legendary launch site was used mainly for Delta IV family rockets, including the now almost retired Delta IV Heavy. Once it was even ready to support West Coast space shuttle launches, with STS-62A being the first one scheduled to launch from Vandenberg. The Challenger disaster was one of the reasons why the whole idea was scrapped, even though $4 billion were already spent on the project. After a short period when the site was used for Athena rocket launches, Slick 6 was finally converted to support the first Delta IV launch in 2006. It came as a surprise that SpaceX was the one to get the pad leased, as it's been speculated that Blue Origin wanted to use Slick 6 for its upcoming New Glenn rocket. If I were to guess, I'd say that SpaceX probably had a pretty solid argument to get Space Launch Complex 6. They can actually make use of the additional launch capability right now. Acquiring Space Launch Complex 6 will allow SpaceX to conduct more Falcon 9 launches from the West Coast, but more importantly, it will also give them the second launch pad capable of launching Falcon Heavy, as now this is only possible from LC-39A at Kennedy Space Center, Florida. The additional Falcon Heavy capable launch complex gives hope that maybe one day we will finally see the promised vertical integration facility and the extended Falcon Heavy fairing. This idea has been gone for so long it passes as an urban legend by now. Who knows, perhaps even Starship will get a pad at Slick 6. After a day of scrubs on April 27th, the next batch of Starlink Group 3.5 was launched on top of booster B1061 in Vandenberg. The day before that, SpaceX had to scrub the launch as apparently there was a risk of landing failure. That's definitely a new call-out that we've never heard before. What does this mean exactly? Perhaps the sea was too rough that day, but then why even bother with attempting the launch? Most likely, the weather or too high waves at the landing location were just at the limit of what SpaceX could allow. That limit was surpassed during the launch prep. Scrub. Either way, the next day, despite the fog that made the vehicle virtually invisible during the first attempt, Falcon 9 successfully ignited its engines and lifted off from Vandenberg Space Force Base. Once the rocket escaped the typical Vandenberg fog, we were greeted by some truly breathtaking shots. From that point on, it was like every single Starlink V1 launch. Well, that was until the booster landing, when an interesting incident occurred. Often, just after the touchdown, there is a small fire under the booster. That's completely normal. But this time, Falcon decided to vent a bit of RP1 directly into this fire. This engulfed the bottom of the booster in a fireball, but fortunately seemed to be harmless, as seconds later there was no trace of a fire left. The mission ended with the correct separation of 46 Starlink satellites. On we go with an even bigger rocket. No, not Starship, be a bit patient. Unfortunately, the launch of a Falcon Heavy was again scrubbed after taking additional time for final checkouts after the static fire. Falcon Heavy was again rolled out to Florida's LC-39A, ready to carry 2 massive satellites Viasat-3 Americas and Arcturus to geostationary Earth orbit. It's worth noting that due to the mission profile, the whole vehicle is set to be expendable, which unfortunately means no landing this time. You can even see it by just looking at the rocket. No legs at all on either of the boosters, lighter but non-reusable at the same time. That's it for today. Remember to like and subscribe, check out our merch store to beef up your space nerd wardrobe. Crazy stuff and absolutely worth a visit. And if you want to get even smarter about space and rockets, watch this video next to continue the journey. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again in the next episode. Concrete under the concrete. To prevent this from happening, yeah. Apocalyptic. Travel. No, that's probably gone.